Hello, BookTube. I wasn't going to do any kind of a weekly wrap-up video. I usually don't do those on this channel, but I love watching them. And also, the three coolest channels on BookTube, Michael K. Vaughan, Ollie at Criminale, and Sarah at The Bookish Knitter, all did weekly wrap-ups of one kind or another. And that left me feeling left out. I felt FOMO. So I thought I would put together a weekly wrap-up of my own. Not of every book that I read this week, but of maybe highlights and lowlights. So we could talk about some more books on this channel. So I've done that. I don't know if this will work. I don't know how natural this will feel for me. It's a little bit tricky. I don't want to go into great depth on books that I may be writing about. But I thought, well, I should at least try it since it's what the cool kids are doing. The weekly wrap-ups are what the cool kids are doing. So let's go through a few books anyway and see how it goes for my previous week. So the first one is the paperback release of After the Romanovs by Helen Rappaport, which is about Russian exiles leaving the Russian revolutions and coming to Paris, to Belle Epoque, Paris. And the paperback is in a white design instead of a darker design like the hardcover was, and comes replete with blurbs. This is terrific. It was really this book. This takes us through all kinds of the experiences of these immigrants, not just the famous ones, the handful of famous ones, but also tons that aren't famous, drawing commonalities between their experiences, but also a absolutely perfect ear for the great standout unique stories. I loved the reread. Absolutely loved it. I didn't bother to assemble all of these physical books here. Instead, I've just got the iPad here. I loved the reread, and it was this book that really convinced me, sort of where I ticked over into no longer approaching this particular author critically, which does happen. That does happen with even living authors. If they consistently do great work, then I'm no longer going to open their new book with all of my quills erect, thinking, all right, here we go. This is an adversarial process. Instead, I'm going to think, great. It's great to be with you again. And what the author is going to have to do after that, when their credit at the Bank of Steve is that high, what the author is going to have to do after that is simply trip over their own feet. They're going to have to fall flat on their own face. I'm not going to watch for it anymore. I'm just going to talk about what they do well. And it was this book that really did it for me with Helen Rappaport. I should probably have reached that point with her a while back, but now I am simply a fan. I don't know that fan is the right word, because I will be critically assessing everything that she writes, but now the axis has changed, definitely. Now, when I see new Helen Rappaport book, my reaction is not going to be, ooh, I want to read that. My reaction is going to be, ooh, that's going to be good. I don't believe that compromises me as a critic, because if it's not good, I'm not going to paper over that fact just because of the momentum. But this is out in paperback now, and I strongly recommend it. It is really, really good. So let's continue here. Okay, all right, well, I'll go from the sublime to the ridiculous here. This is the first book in a series. It was suggested to me by Amazon. I try never to let Amazon suggestions go by, especially in the Kindle Unlimited line. I mean, I get 20-something books that I can borrow on Kindle Unlimited. I can keep them as long as I want. The only thing that forces me to change one out is if I'm at my limit. It's such a great policy. I have never regretted paying a little bit extra per year for Kindle Unlimited. I've never regretted that. And it introduces me to indie authors that I would never see otherwise. And I'm a huge fan of indie authors. Sometimes the work can be hit or miss. A lot of it's done in fun. I believe this book is done in fun. This is by what I believe is a writing duo, L.C. Davis, and this is Brough and the Beast, because you got to have something for the gays. And also keep in mind, remember Steve's prediction. I don't know how many of my videos each one of you watches. I assume that every single one of you watches every single video. I'm assuming that. But keep in mind my prediction. Those of us who watch US book covers, especially romance covers, have been talking forever about those dumb cartoon covers that were all the rage, have been all the rage for 8 years. Keep in mind Steve's prediction. AI-generated artwork is going to be everywhere. It's going to be the only thing you see on book covers. And I don't believe that trend can be called a trend, because I don't think it's going to stop until Congress catches up with the law of AI generated art in order to, make the revenue more fair or the royalties more fair. Until that happens, as long as this is the Wild West, this is the only thing you're going to see. That is, I believe, an AI generated cover. I could be wrong. Maybe this is an artist that I'm maligning here. But this is a story of a quintessential frat boy. And the authors may know a quintessential frat boy or two. I have known quite a few. They were my favorite type of people to know in college. Picking my words very delicately here. They were my favorite type of people to know, to hang out with, to amuse ourselves with. They were to write papers for. They were my favorite type. And the stereotypical frat boy at the beginning of this novel seems fairly true to the mark. Maybe the ambivalence that you're sensing here is that I get the impression maybe that the authors got more of their awareness of what is a stereotypical frat boy from movies or maybe other books than from ever knowing one. But anyway, oh God. Kindle Unlimited always gets me into trouble, or maybe I get myself into trouble. At the beginning of this book, the frat boy has a car accident, and in the last second of consciousness, he assumes he's going to die. And when he wakes up, he is the main character in a cheesy shifter romance novel that his brother had been reading. So he's aware of the details of this book just enough so that when he wakes up, he's thinking, maybe I'm not awake. Maybe this is all a delusion. Maybe this isn't real at all. Nevertheless, the other characters in the story don't know anything about a near fatal car accident. They don't know anything about themselves being characters in a novel. They only know what they want. And that very much includes the main shapeshifter, Raoul, who quickly wants our main character in every possible way. And the every possible way part is covered by the fact that this is an MPreg novel. This is an Omegaverse novel. We are returning to the Omegaverse. Which, for those of you who maybe don't remember my unbelievable adventures in Autumn Amour, that is a whole sprawling universe of novels by a whole bunch of different people. They aren't writing in concert with each other. Set in a world in which there are alphas, there are omegas, there are a class of men who can get pregnant. Not fall into the burly arms of their boyfriend, want to have a baby, and then buy one on the Taiwanese market, the way all the gay influencers do, but instead actually get pregnant and deliver the baby through the poop chute, I might add. Although I haven't yet had the kind of biological manual that I want for the Omegaverse. Maybe I don't want that, but anyway. This is part one in a series, and part of the fun of this book is the main character just figuring out that this all seems real. that is a clever gimmick, to have a character wake up inside a novel that he already knows exists. That's a clever gimmick. That's quite different from, for instance, the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever, where he wakes up in a fantasy world, but he has never heard of any of the details of it before. He might suspect in the course of those books that he is making it up as he goes along on a hospital bed somewhere, but it wasn't known to him ahead of time. Whereas in this case it is. So this was quite a great deal of mindless fun, and it did exactly what I've come on to rely on Amazon's algorithm and also on Kindle Unlimited itself to do for me, which is to serve me up, to recommend for me authors and series that I intend to follow. I liked enough of this book to follow this series. That is wonderful. And I don't know of any other thing like that. So that is wonderful. I'm very happy about that. Then another book that we'll do this is a weekly wrap-up. I don't know how this is going to go. Should I do this every week? I just felt compelled by peer pressure, because the three coolest channels on BookTube all did weekly wrap-ups, and I saw their videos all at once. So I felt scorned, and I want a seat at the cool kids table. But anyway, speaking of cool kids, of course, you have to talk about Mark Richardson. And Mark Richardson is doing two very low-key, fantastic series that he is part hosting on here. I'm loving it, absolutely loving it. I haven't been making the videos that I really should be. One of them is reading through the Horatio Hornblower novels of C.S. Forster, and we are up to Hornblower and the Hotspur, which was a 1962 novel that follows Hornblower as he is master and commander of a vessel for the first time. So we're reading these in chronological order rather than publication order. So 1962 is very late. I think there was that Forster only wrote one Hornblower book after this. Here he is filling in an earlier period of his already famous hero by sending him to the Brest blockade, the blockade of the coast of France, which is in Patrick O'Brien's Aubrey and Maturin series. The Brest blockade is described as a living death, the kind of assignment that no one wants, because not only is it horribly wearing on your vessel to be constantly confined to such a small area, not only is it constantly wearing on the morale of your men because they don't get to do anything, but also because there's no chance of snapping up a prize. There's no chance of enriching yourself as captain. And we follow Hornblower here, and it's a kind of grim assignment, but there's a part of him that's happy to embrace it because he's just married. He's just married his Maria. And I know Hornblower fans go back and forward on this, but I think it's a loveless marriage. I don't think that Hornblower really has the capacity for love. I really don't think he does. He's a brooding, quiet, introverted figure, very unlike, for instance, Jack Aubrey, who has the capacity not only for raunchy physical love, but also for deeper connections, deeper emotional connections. I don't think that Jack Aubrey ever feels that for his own wife in the Aubrey and Maturin novels, but he definitely feels that kind of deep, abiding emotional commitment for instance, Stephen Maturin, and I think he feels it for his longtime mistress as well. But Hornblower, no, no. That's one of the things that always strikes me about these books is that Forster made the very conscious decision to make Hornblower both a paragon and an automaton. And there are all sorts of adventures in this book. It's just a fantastic saga of adventures, because Hornblower isn't content, just to be part of the regular maneuvers of the blockade. He has all sorts of adventures on land as well, and they are thrilling. They are thrillingly done. So I mean, I'm a lot more on board with this series. Like I mentioned when we were talking about Mr. Midshipman Hornblower, I'm a lot more on board with this series the more agency Hornblower has, the more he's able to do things in his own stories, as opposed to things just falling into his lap. This is very much along those lines, and also, I know I've said in these Hornblower videos a few times that Forster doesn't really hone his craft. He doesn't really do that. He never, I don't think, ever really did. But there are small ways in which you can definitely see that he is a more seasoned storyteller, making slightly better decisions, especially about info dumps. And I think you can see this book benefits from that. This is definitely a 1962 Forster novel as opposed to a 1950 Forster novel. So, for instance, so I read this for this week and really liked it. Then, as long as we're on the subject, we might as well go to the other read-along, the other series that Mark Richardson is doing, and that is the Sackett series, Louis L'Amour's Sackett novels. Louis L'Amour, of course, is absolutely synonymous with Westerns. And we will be reading some Louis L'Amour in June on the Range, a booktube event designed to celebrate Westerns. But he wrote a lot of other things, too. Tons of other things. He was, I think, quintessentially an adventure writer who just happened to realize that he had a huge, eager audience for Westerns. But he could do anything. And we're reading the Sackett novels. We're up to 1980s The Warrior's Path here. This weirdly effective cover. I don't know quite what I make of this. I ought to consider this anticlimactic. Because technically speaking, the scene that should be the cover of this book is what these people do 5 minutes from now. but nevertheless, I really like it. I don't quite know why. But this follows, we were in the early Sackett books, we were talking about Barnabas Sackett, who is the founder of the line, the pater familias, the guy who's capable of anything, does anything, larger than life. Here we're following his son Kin, who has to follow in his footsteps. And a sister-in-law of the increasingly sprawling Sackett family has been kidnapped. And Kin and one other Sackett are the two main characters here, and they have to find her. And this does not involve them lighting out for the territory so much as them taking ship for the West Indies. And that is this is a big book. It's a longer Sackett novel, I think, than any of the others. And boy, oh boy, is it good. Just fantastically good. Much like Hornblower and the Hotspur, only here the whole half the hemisphere is your scene of action. But the thing, I don't know. I didn't think the dialogue was very strong in this book. I'm not sure how good Louis L'Amour is on dialogue just in general, but the characters and the dialogue, not so much. I don't think that Kin ever really stands on his own. Maybe that's just a factor of this book, or maybe it's that very few characters that Louis L'Amour ever wrote stand on their own next to Barnabas Sackett. Maybe that's the case. But I love the descriptions here. This book, more than most Louis L'Amour novels that I have read or reread, is perfectly okay with pausing to talk about the natural world, to talk about the splendors of the ocean, or the amazing multi-layered depths of the virgin American wilderness. This book seems to be more comfortable doing that than a lot of Louis L'Amour novels that I have read. I don't think I've read them all, but for instance, I've read a ton of his absolutely just straight up Western novels, and most of them don't do that. Even when the action is taking place in those locations, those natural locations, they don't tend to do that. Not in the way this one does. This struck me as almost yearning to be a different book, a different kind of book, and certainly setting the template. Back in 1980, setting or cementing the template that has a place in these kind of adventure novels. But it's mainly swashbuckling adventure. It's mainly just terrific. There are a couple of heroes, and there are also a couple of villains. And in any Louis L'Amour novel, you want the villains to get their comeuppance. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the hands of the heroes, but that is perfectly done here. Just perfectly done. So I could not be happier with this read-along. An inspired idea to read the Sackett novels again. Then let's see here. Let's move on there's this one. This is Sarah Hart. We saw this on this channel, I believe. This is Once Upon a Prime, The Wondrous Connections Between Mathematics and Literature. And you can guess, I think I showed you when I opened this on camera, how ambivalent I would be towards this. Because math and I don't get along. I know that math geeks like to refer to it as the universal language, but I'm quite good with languages, and math has always been incomprehensible to me. Simply incomprehensible. So I was kind of assuming that this would be a disaster. And instead, it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Not just talking about authors that I know really well, although I had no idea how fascinated, for instance, George Eliot was with math for her whole life. I had no idea that was true. I'd missed it somehow in all the biographies that I've read. I guess I'd missed it. But also the way this author thinks about the authors and the literary works that she's dealing with. Whether it's Moby Dick or science fiction, the way she thinks about these things is so wonderfully grainy and muscular that I wouldn't have cared if her emphasis had been horticulture and literature. I wouldn't have cared at all. It's really kind of a sui generis book, but I was not expecting to like it as much as I did. I thought it was fantastic. I strongly, strongly recommend it. I believe this is an April release, so it'll come out. April 4th is the big day for April releases, but check the different Tuesdays of the month. This is well worth your time. Definitely request it at your library. If you like books and you're on cold about math, then you're in the exact position that I was when I started this. I was not expecting to like it this much, so it's a very positive week for me, generally speaking. That isn't always true. This is the memoir of Paris Hilton. This is her second memoir. And I was coerced, nudged, peer pressured into reading this by a fan of Paris Hilton, by Jack Strange, who has a booktube channel. It's a great booktube channel. You should all subscribe. His video dealing with this book is wonderful. But he brackets that video front, center, and end by admitting that he is a Paris Hilton fan, that he's grown up with this celebrity figure and believes in her. And this book was clearly written for him. It was clearly written for people like that. The book that it reminded me of most strongly was not Paris Hilton's previous book, although I have a strong suspicion they were written by the same person. In neither case was it Paris Hilton. Come on. I mean, come on. Watch a YouTube interview. I'm not talking about the persona that she did in scripted reality TV shows like The Simple Life. Watch an interview. Watch 2 interviews. This person cannot write a memoir. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. David Niven couldn't write a memoir either. Well, I guess actors are notoriously dumb. Oh, no offense to Doom Antidote. But, oh, God. All right. Well, these weekly wrap-ups, this is my first one. It's bound to be a little rough on it. The book that this most reminded me of was Spare by Prince Harry. Not only because it's remarkably ungenerous to people who were only minding their own business. There are villains in this book, and I don't think they saw it coming. Of course, Spare is much worse along those lines, but there's another way in which it kept reminding me of Spare. And that is that I don't believe a single word of this book. I don't believe a single word of it any more than I did Spare. I don't think any of the actual declarative sentences in Spare are factually correct. And I don't believe any of the facts in this book either. Not one. There's a long, protracted section in here about what a hellhole her boarding school was. This blonde airhead heiress who has no matter what this book says, she has never needed to want for anything in her entire life. There's a long description here. It's, I guess, the most effective part of the book. There's a later section too that's pretty effective, but again, effective is in air quotes because this is horribly written. This is just horribly written. It's almost bad enough prose for me to think that Paris Hilton did, in fact, write it herself, but I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. This was a bought and paid product like literally everything else in her life, including her offspring. But I made no secret of the fact that I went into this book already thinking that this book did not convince me that I am wrong at all about what a vacuous idiot this person is, any more than it convinced me, than Spare convinced me about what a poor put-upon victim Prince Harry is. But for instance, that long section about her boarding school, the boarding school that she goes to, read that section not as a Paris Hilton fan, but simply as a reader of a memoir. I defy you to come out of that section thinking any different than I did, which is the reason that you're dumping so much hate on this place is because it was the first time in your life, and also the only time, before or since, when you couldn't wake up, clap your hands, and be waited upon. That was what made it horrible for you. Not anything else. It was that element that made it horrible for you. All the rest of your life, the whole of it, before and after, you could wake up, clap your hands, and someone would immediately be there to ask what you want. And then you just say what you want. It is really hard to muster sympathy for a protagonist like that, especially if she's going to spend the whole book whining, which is what she does. This is no offense to Jack Strange. I love his channel, but if you can finish this memoir and think that this person is the savvy business suit wearing, take no prisoners, leave business notes for herself on the taxi cab on the way up to deal with a boardroom of sleepy executives. And if you can finish this memoir and think that this person has in any way earned her C-suite status, then I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you, because it is patently obvious in the course of this book that is not true. that is not true. That everything, that every instinct you have ever developed in your life about other people, every instinct that you have developed over years is telling you about this person is actually true. Is actually true. If I'm wrong about that, I remember when I showed you this book originally, I was thinking, well, if I'm wrong, then maybe this book will show me that I'm wrong. This book did not show me that I'm wrong. I could still be wrong, but it's not going to be this that does it. It's going to be maybe a biography of hers, something, or the original documents or something like this. In this case, the whole time I wanted to say, in fact, a couple of times out loud, I did say, you are aware that there are other people, you're young, there are other people alive in every one of these circumstances who could testify as to whether or not you're telling the truth. You are aware of that, right? You're not talking about the Franco-Prussian Empire here. You're talking about teachers and colleagues and coworkers and schoolmates who are your age and could easily say, no, nothing like that ever happened. I don't know if anybody's actually come forward to do that, but it wouldn't surprise me. So that was a booktube. Booktube made me do it read that went astray. This next one it's from Routledge University Press. It's really, really good, but it's kind of specialized. I really enjoyed it. I lost 2 hours in this book, but it's kind of niche, and I bet it would be really expensive. So I'm putting it here just as a kind of a highlight from the week's reading, but I don't expect you to rush out and buy a copy. There's an editorial team behind this, and the book is, I got the cover image offline. Oh, goodness gracious. I'm realizing now that it has, I think I got this from the cover image from the Routledge website, and it still has enlarged book cover on it. That is not part of the title. The title is The Real Estate Market in the Roman World. Here, let's just get that out of there like that. And this is a series of scholarly articles about everything that we can know about the real estate market in the Roman world. What it was like for apartment buildings, construction standards, speculation, rent even, all that sort of stuff. When rent was due, how far in arrears you could be, what kind of legal rights landlords had, what kind of legal rights tenants had, through various eras of the Roman world. I eat this stuff up. I thought this was just fantastic, but it's not written to be read. Most of the people writing these articles in this thing are guilty of what I often say historians are often guilty of, which is that they don't think they need to tell a good story. That isn't true. They do. They absolutely do. But the Academy doesn't think so. So you'll get a lot of that. In other words, what I'm saying is some of the reading in here, the actual page by page reading, is a slog. I just find the subject endlessly interesting. That's all. So I just ate it up. And then we can finish up here. This is 30 minutes. We're not covering many books, but that's because I'm opinionizing on every one of them. I don't really know how to do a weekly wrap-up. But if the cool kids are going to do one, then I want to do one. I'll have to figure out how to do these. But then we'll finish up with this last book, which is in some ways the most impressive reading experience that I had, reread in this case, this week. It's by Chad Williams. I think we've seen it on this channel a couple of times. It's The Wounded World. W.E. Du Bois and the First World War, which opens with the gambit of reconstructing, renovating, and talking about the book that Du Bois was going to write on World War I. And that I would have considered fascinating anyway. I think I mentioned at the time that I got the finished copy of this that I love books about the history of specific books or reconstructions of lost books. I think those are all fantastic. I love them even when they're about books I don't like. But this turned out to be much, much more than that. This is an unbelievable biography. In addition to a biography of a work, this is an unbelievably good, searching, heartfelt biography of Du Bois himself, and a fantastic picture of his broader world. The more I read the advanced copy of this and thought, boy, oh boy, that was more than I was expecting. And then I read the finished copy and thought, okay, that was genuinely impressive. And the more I've waited on it, the more I've put the finished copy aside, the more I've been thinking about it. This is very, very much an author who does not forget what I was talking about for the Routledge book. He does not forget that he needs to tell you a good story. A moving, gripping, incredibly intelligently done story about a towering, complex figure who's far more than just the author of one book that a lot of people have to read in school. I was tremendously impressed by this week. So we have spanned the gamut here on this weekly wrap up. I don't know what this video is. We spanned the gamut from the Brough and the Beast to the Wounded World and everything in between. I don't know if this is how I will do reading wrap-ups. If I do a weekly reading wrap-up, will I touch on the BookTube events that I'm doing? That's always a touchy thing because I'm an enthusiastic participant on BookTube, including I let BookTube suggest a lot of my reading, including BookTube events where I'm sure that the event hosts think I'm Satan incarnate. So that'd be a little awkward to do that. I guess I can mention it on a video. I mean, they're obviously not watching my channel, so they're not going to care. I don't know. If I do a weekly wrap-up, the way the cool kids do we want more conversation and fewer books? More books and less conversation? More conversation and more books? I don't know. I just couldn't not do it. I felt peer pressured. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.